A God we can see? In our last story, we learned about God's promises to bless His people and be with them. He descended in fire, lightning, and smoke on Mount Sinai to give Moses a word for the people. He gave them the 10 Commandments. Then He asked them to build a tabernacle so He could dwell with His people. In this story, we learn about the Israelites already breaking the first commandment. Their impatience leads them astray, and they betray the God that had just delivered them out of slavery, as inspired by the book of Exodus. Moses had ascended back up to Mount Sinai to hear from God on behalf of the people. The thunder still rolled down the mountain like waves crashing on a shore. The people took note of Moses' delay to come down from the mountain, so they turned to Aaron for guidance. "We do not know what has become of Moses. He is the one who brought us out of Egypt. Quick, make God for us, to protect and nurture us." Aaron, just as confused and desperate as the people, agreed. He said to them, "Take off all your rings, earrings, and necklaces of gold, and bring them to me." So all the people began to lay down their possessions at the feet of Aaron. They willingly gave up what was precious to them, yet all for a fabrication, a false sense of security. Aaron, using fashioning tools, constructed a golden calf with his own bare hands. He brought the calf before the people, erected high into the air so everyone could see. Applause roared throughout the camp. Dancing and revelry began to spread. "These are your gods, people of Israel. These are the gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt." The people cried out, paying no mind to God's first encouragement to them when He said, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of slavery." In the distance God was meeting with Moses, yet this was not hidden from His sight. When Aaron saw how happy the calf made the people, he built an altar for it. He hosted a large feast to celebrate their new God. They rose up early the next day to give peace offerings. As the day dragged on, they feasted like gluttons, filling their bellies with meat and wine. A strange daze of drunkenness slithered around camp, as people rose up in dancing and orgies. Their laughter was not joyful praise, rather inebriated and lustful cackles. They paid homage to their created God by creating their own worship, satisfying every selfish desire they could come up with. The newly freed slaves of Israel began to look a whole lot like their old masters, the Egyptians. The stench of their idolatry carried through the canyons up to the mountain where God met with Moses. In the quietness of his prayers to God, Moses heard his voice change. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down to see your people, for they have corrupted themselves. How quickly they have turned from my commandments. High and lifted up among them is a golden calf, for whom they have sacrificed and worshipped." Moses' eyes widened. Though the people may have lost their fear of God, Moses surely did not. He had remembered all the Lord was capable of, and how kind He had been to all the children of Israel. God continued and said, "I have looked upon my people, and behold, they are a stubborn people. Leave this place, for my wrath will descend upon them like wildfire. From you alone I will build my nation." These words disturbed Moses. He fell before God and said, "Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people? You have brought them out of slavery with your might. The Egyptians will say you lured them out of slavery just to kill them. Please turn from your anger and have mercy on them." Tears began to flow from Moses as he begged God to spare them. "Remember your promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," Moses implored. His prayer was not long, but it was strong. Moses reflected the merciful heart of God in his prayers, and they pleased God. Moses was truly a leader, able to reflect God's heart and desire. Moses could have easily done nothing, but instead he interceded for his people. God looked upon Moses. He was pleased. and relented. Moses hustled down the mountain, eyes piercing with an internal fury. Moses had 2 tablets of the testimony of God in his hands. The writings of God for the people were engraved in stone. Joshua was waiting at the base of the mountain for Moses. When Joshua heard the celebration from camp, he ran to go meet Moses and said, "There are sounds of war in the camp." Moses and Joshua came near to the camp and saw the calf risen high among the people. Moses peered across the sea of drunk faces. They danced to the music. They caressed those that were not their wives or husbands. They drank their wisdom away. Moses watched this. He was right in front of them, yet unseen because of their drunkenness. In that moment, a deep anger came upon Moses, an anger that had not been awakened since he was a young man, strangling the Egyptian taskmaster. In an outburst of rage, Moses threw the stone tablets at the foot of the mountain. The sound echoed across the canyon, and the dancing and music ceased. The people turned their heads and stared up at Moses. Silence fell upon them all. Moses walked into the crowd of people and took the calf from the altar. Without saying anything, Moses dragged the calf past the people towards the bonfire in the middle of the camp. He threw it into the fire and watched it melt with his back turned towards the people. He scooped up its ashes and scattered them in the water nearby. He took a cup and filled it with the water and gave it to the people to drink. The bitter taste of the gold-dusted water was a reminder of where they had come from. They had just escaped the bitter gripes of slavery, and they ought not to make themselves slaves again. Moses looked to Aaron, who had remained silent. "What did they do to you, Aaron?" Moses said, with his eyes filling up with tears. "Why have you brought sin upon all of them?" Aaron was frantic, seeking to justify his actions. He was a brilliant communicator, and just as his ancestor Jacob, Aaron could talk himself out of almost any situation. "Don't burn with anger, Moses. You know the people are set on evil. They wanted the false gods. I tossed their god in the fire, and the calf just appeared," Aaron lied. And just as Adam did eons ago, he deferred the responsibility. Moses looked at the people and saw that Aaron had allowed them to divide and become loose with one another. Aaron had once been his mouthpiece, but now Moses had to speak. He stood at the base of the camp and shouted, "Who is on the Lord's side? If anyone is on God's side, come stand by me." Out of the vast crowd, the sons of Levi came forward from the group. Moses then commanded them to kill those who had caused the most dissension. With swords in their hands, the sons of Levi killed about 3,000 men that day. The silence was cut, and screams oozed out of the camp like blood. Moses spoke to the sons of Levi and said, "Today you have been ordained into the service of God. Each one of you will have a blessing this day." The sun rose the next day, and a gentle breeze came in through the canyon. The people were silent, and Moses paced the camp, gathering them to the base of the mountain. He looked to them and said, "Your sin was an intense sin. I am going back up to the Lord, and perhaps there is atonement for what you have done." So Moses left, and the people watched him ascend back up the mountain. Moses spoke before God and said, "They have sinned greatly against you, gods of gold." Moses cut himself off and clenched his fist. His eyes closed and his face held back tears. "Please forgive them," Moses whispered. "But if you do not, kill me instead of them." Moses trembled as he said these words. If a simple sacrifice would not suffice, Moses wanted to stand between God and them as atonement. There was a gentle silence between them. The Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will require something from them." And then he sent Moses back down the mountain. God would not blot out his people. He promised Jacob that his seed would spring forth a mighty nation, and all nations would be redeemed. He would not waver from that promise. Hundreds of years prior, Jacob wrestled with God in the dead of night. Jacob was flawed and filled with sin, but he clung to God for blessing. So he renamed him Israel, which means wrestles with God. Now the people of Israel would continue to sin, be flawed, but cling to God for blessing. They would continue to wrestle with God, and he would still bless them. A great plague fell upon Israel that day. Yet in the midst of their punishment, there was hope and mercy. God would not depart from them.